The most dangerous man is not the loud one, not the one who argues or shows off his intelligence. It's the silent one, the man who pretends he knows nothing. Machiavelli understood one brutal truth. The smartest people pretend to be foolish because it blinds their enemies. When you act unaware, others reveal their real faces. When you appear weak, the arrogant lower their guard. And when you stay quiet, you hear what they wish you never knew. Power is not always shown sometimes. It's hidden behind a foolish smile. The game isn't to be right. It's to be underestimated. Because in underestimation lies total control. The clever man never shows all his intelligence at once. In a world driven by ego and noise, the wisest strategy is silence, dressed as stupidity. Machiavelli knew that the greatest power is not in appearing dominant, but in making others believe you're harmless. People are quick to expose themselves in front of someone they don't fear. That's why the smartest don't rush to prove their intelligence. They hide it, bury it beneath a mask of innocence, and let arrogance dig its own grave. In the court of power, fools speak first. The wise man listens, nods, and collects ammunition made of secrets. When the world thinks you're weak, it forgets to protect itself from you. That's when control becomes effortless. To pretend to be foolish is not cowardice. It's the luxury of those who know their strength doesn't need validation. Power isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't perform. True power smiles, waits, and strikes when no one sees it coming. Pretending to be foolish gives you access no weapon can. It makes you invisible. And the invisible man always walks freely behind enemy lines. While the loud ones are marked, watched, and feared, the quiet fool is left alone, underestimated, ignored, dismissed. And that is the perfect position to conquer. Every time you speak less, they speak more. Every time you play the fool, they show their true faces. What they don't realize is, behind your calm eyes is a calculation they'll never see. Their pride becomes your trap. Their overconfidence becomes your power. The fool is a mirror, showing people their own vanity while hiding his own ambition. The art of deception is not in telling lies, it's in letting others lie to themselves in your presence. The moment they believe they are smarter than you, they stop guarding their strategy. They reveal their plans, their insecurities, their patterns. And you simply nod and store everything like a soldier counting enemy weapons before the battle. That is why the wise must sometimes play the fool, because it opens doors that raw intelligence could never unlock. In Machiavelli's world, truth was currency, but illusion was power. And nothing is more powerful than a mind that chooses to be underestimated. Do not chase respect by showing off your knowledge. Let them disrespect you. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate you. Because when the time comes, their laughter will be their last comfort. Power moves in silence, and silence is best achieved behind the mask of a harmless fool. It's a strategy as old as empires. Julius Caesar once cried in front of his enemies not because he was weak, but because he wanted them to believe it. Meanwhile, his army marched forward. The greatest players of power have always worn disguises. The idiot in the room is often the only one who understands the game. Never let your enemies know how sharp your mind is. The sharper it is, the more they'll try to dull it. But if they think you're blunt, they leave you alone. And that's when you sharpen it even more. Pretending to be foolish is a shield, a method of control, a quiet chess move while the others scream at a poker table. The most strategic minds don't win by playing hard. They win by appearing absent and striking when the game is nearly over. The moment they see you as irrelevant, they stop preparing for your move. That's the exact moment you make it. You must learn to enjoy being underestimated. It gives you freedom no one else has. You can walk into a room full of kings and not threaten a single one. You can sit among wolves and not smell like prey. And when you finally rise, they won't know where you came from. Because you were always there, just smarter, just quieter, just more dangerous than they imagined. Machiavelli's genius wasn't in fighting louder. It was in thinking deeper. He didn't want to win the battle in public. He wanted to win the war in private. And he did by knowing when to act and when to pretend he couldn't. So if you are smart, hide it. If you are powerful, smile humbly. If you know the truth, don't rush to correct the lie. Watch it grow. Let it rot. And when it collapses, stand quietly on the ruins. That is the Machiavellian way, not to shine in the crowd, but to blind them when they least expect it. The fool who stays quiet is not a fool. He's just waiting for the world to fall asleep before he rewrites the rules. You don't need to speak to prove your wisdom. Let the world think you don't understand. Because in that misunderstanding, you become untouchable. The greatest deception is not in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. In the silence of a so-called fool lies the most dangerous form of intelligence, one that collects, remembers, and waits. When you play dumb, you gain time. Time to observe, time to test, time to plan. The world rewards those who react fast. But Machiavelli admired those who waited until everyone else revealed themselves first. When people think you're not a threat, they open their mouths. And when they open their mouths, they hand you the map to their downfall. Do not correct them. Do not show them you see more than they do. Let them speak. Let them fall in love with their own voice. Meanwhile, you write their future in your head. Every time you play the fool, you're planting a weapon in the shadows. One day, they will wonder how you rose so high. But they won't remember what you saw when they were too busy laughing. Their mockery is your camouflage. Their arrogance is your fuel. They give you all the information, all the weaknesses, because they believe you have none. But the truth is, pretending to be foolish is the only way to move through a ruthless world without becoming its next victim. You don't need to attack when they're already handing you everything. You don't need to scream when they think you're blind. That's when your power grows quietly like poison in a cup no one's watching. A smart man who shows his mind becomes a target. A smart man who hides it becomes a storm. You don't win by shouting, you win by listening. You don't rise by explaining yourself, you rise by letting others underestimate you until it's too late. That is the essence of control. Machiavelli never said to be honest. He said to be effective. And if pretending to be the fool gets you the kingdom, then let them call you a clown. Because the throne doesn't care what names they whispered, it only matters who sits on it when the game ends. There is freedom in not being the brightest light in the room. Bright lights attract too many hands that want to switch them off. But the dim light, the unnoticed flame, it survives. And when the darkness comes, it's the only light that remains. That's what it means to be underestimated. That's what it means to wear the mask of foolishness while guarding a mind sharper than any sword. You are not here to impress them. You are here to outlast them. And you will, if you learn to make silence your weapon and stupidity your disguise. In the game of survival, lions don't roar before they pounce. They crouch low, they watch, and they strike only when the prey forgets to run. When you pretend to be the fool, you make others believe they are the lion. And that belief blinds them to the moment you sharpen your claws in the dark. They will never see it coming, because their pride won't let them. And pride is the perfect leash. Give them compliments. Let them win arguments. Let them teach you lessons you already know. That's not weakness. That's the stage. That's the trap. That's the beautiful silence before the fall. They will say you're fake. Let them. They will say you're slow. Let them. They will say you're harmless. Let them. Their opinions are weapons against themselves, because while they waste time defining you, you're already moving past them. One fake mistake at a time. One innocent smile at a time. Until the final moment when you no longer need to act, because the act is over, and now you're the only one standing. That is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "It's better to appear weak than to be feared too early." Let their fear arrive late. Let it arrive after you've already won. A day will come when you no longer need to pretend, when their eyes open too late, and they finally realize the fool was never the fool. He was the fire. He was the one writing the rules while they danced around him. But by then, it won't matter, because you'll already have taken everything. Their trust, their secrets, their power all handed to you while they thought you were nothing. That's not just deception. That's destiny carved in silence. The final victory never belongs to the one who speaks first. It belongs to the one who listens longest, waits silently, and strikes without warning. The fool they mocked is now the ruler they fear. And still, he says nothing. Because the true master of deception does not need validation. He doesn't explain how he got here. He doesn't remind them of their words, their laughter, their insults. He lets them remember. He lets silence punish them more than revenge ever could. That's the final level of control, not to fight your enemies, but to let them drown in their own miscalculation. When they finally understand who you were, they won't applaud. They'll tremble. Because they'll realize every word they said, every time they ignored you, every time they felt superior, it was part of your design. You let them build the illusion. You let them play God in a world you secretly owned. You gave them the stage so you could write the ending. That's not strategy, that's supremacy. And now you understand the game. Why smart people pretend to be foolish. Why the most brilliant minds choose silence over performance. Because in a world obsessed with being heard, the one who watches quietly becomes the most dangerous. Power is not taken. It is absorbed moment by moment, move by move, until no one sees the shift, until it's too late. The fool who stayed quiet, he now controls the room, and those who once laughed, they now lower their eyes. That's the art of power Machiavelli mastered. Not with force, not with noise, but with the most underestimated weapon of all, the mask of a fool and the heart of a king. And now that the mask is off, you realize something deeper. It was never about them, not their approval, not their insults, not their applause. It was always about timing. The fool you played was never fake. It was the version of you that understood the battlefield better than they did. You gave up the need to be seen so you could see everything. You surrendered the spotlight so you could light your own path. And now, standing here, you know the truth. The most powerful person in the room is the one no one prepared for. The one who came without noise. The one who let the world mock, betray, and ignore him just to test how blind they really were. Let them call you quiet. Let them call you soft. Let them say you were never meant to lead. Because that is the gift of fools. They believe only in what they can see. But power doesn't scream. It doesn't warn. It doesn't beg to be followed. It stands still while the world crashes around it. Machiavelli never wanted to be liked. He wanted to be untouchable. And now, so do you. Not because of pride, but because you finally understand. Silence is not weakness. It's the sharpest sword. The quietest room holds the most danger, and the man who says nothing is usually the one who already won. They will rewrite the story now. They'll say they always knew. They'll say, you changed. But you'll smile. Not because they're right, but because it never mattered what they believed. They weren't part of the plan. They were part of the lesson. And that's the final twist in the Machiavellian mind. You don't just win. You win without them ever realizing how. That's not luck. That's not fate. That's cold, silent, deliberate domination. And it all started the moment you chose to look foolish. They laughed at you because they needed to believe they were above you. Their ego demanded it. Your silence threatened them. Your stillness felt wrong to their chaotic minds. And so, they created a version of you that was easy to forget, easy to label as weak, slow, soft, stupid. But all this time, you were watching, not from below, from beyond. You weren't playing the same game. You were redesigning the board. You let them think they were winning because it gave you space. Space to observe, space to grow, space to become unrecognizable. And now you've become what they fear the most. Someone they can't read, can't predict, can't break. You are not just underestimated. You are untraceable. The mask you wore wasn't a weakness. It was armor. And now that you've removed it, there is no going back. Because now, they will panic. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't. Not because you showed them your strength, but because they finally realize how long you've been hiding it. This is the moment the fool becomes a phantom. The silent one becomes a storm. You no longer need applause. You no longer need recognition. You've mastered the ultimate Machiavellian art to walk through the fire without leaving ash behind. No noise. No mess. Just power in its purest form. Unseen. Untouchable. Unforgettable. Let them rewrite your story. Let them tremble behind fake smiles. Let them wonder, how did we miss this? But you won't answer, because fools talk, kings nod, and emperors disappear into legend. They thought silence meant weakness because they were raised in noise. They mistook stillness for confusion because their minds never knew peace. They believed your quiet eyes couldn't see through them, and so they confessed their truths in the name of laughter. But now they see you. Not the version they created, not the puppet they mocked. Now they see the architect, the manipulator, the man who never spoke because he didn't need to. You gave them your silence, not as surrender, but as a mirror, and they filled it with their own pride, their own lies, their own destruction. That is the first rule of deep power. Let others destroy themselves in the presence of your calm. Fools need to be seen, but the wise, they disappear in plain sight. They blend into the noise until they become the silence everyone fears. Machiavelli wrote not for those who wanted to survive, but for those who wanted to dominate without blood. And to dominate without blood, you must first make them believe there is no knife in your hand. You did that. Every smile you gave, every fake nod, every delayed reaction, it was war painted as ignorance. And now that you've won, they still don't understand how. Because real power does not announce itself. It infects. You walk slowly, not because you were behind, but because you wanted to hear every sound, feel every vibration, sense every shift. And while they danced for attention, you mapped their hunger, their desperation, their weak points. That is how kings are built, not by strength, but by silence that collects everything. You didn't just pretend to be a fool. You gave them a character so believable They never questioned your script. And that is the art of domination. To play the victim so convincingly that when you rise, the audience blames itself. They thought they could predict you, but prediction requires visibility. You were never truly there. You were just an echo behind their pride, a shadow beneath their ambition. And now, when they reach for you, there's nothing left. Because you don't stay to explain. You don't stay to be thanked. You disappear like every great strategist does in the moment the applause begins. Not because you're afraid of attention, but because attention is a cage, and your mind was never born to be caged. What they failed to see is that every fool is not a fool. Some are observers. Some are kings in exile. Some are storms that wait decades to be born. And you were all three. You were patience dressed as incompetence. You were strategy wrapped in delay. You were not late, you were deliberate. They feared you when you were finally seen. But if they had known what lived behind your eyes, they would have knelt long ago. Because what you hold now is not just knowledge, it's prophecy fulfilled in silence. You never wanted their respect. Respect is shallow. You wanted space. You wanted them to turn away, just long enough for you to rewrite everything behind their backs. And they did. Because people crave performance, and you gave them boredom. People crave heroes, and you became invisible. People feared danger, and you became forgettable. But now the game ends. And the one they never counted is the only one still standing. They called you slow because you didn't run with them. But the wolves who survive the winter are not the ones who chase, they are the ones who stalk. In silence, in patience, in precision. They asked why you didn't speak, why you didn't prove your worth, why you let others rise above you. And you smiled. Because you knew every fool in power exposes himself in time. Every king who crowns himself without pain forgets to guard the back of his throne. And you were already behind him, watching. You were learning how he moved, how he lied, how he slept at night believing no one was watching. But you were. Every second, every breath, every betrayal. You remembered, and you stored it like cold steel in the dark. They celebrated too early. That was their first mistake. And they judged you too soon. That was their last. Because the man they thought they broke was never even in the fight. He was underground, silent, growing roots beneath the soil they walked on. And when the time came, he didn't shout. He rose. And the ones who laughed, they couldn't speak anymore. Because power, real power, is not in reaction, it's in timing. And when your time came, it wasn't loud. It was surgical, clean, final. You must never forget this. Fools run after the crown, but the true prince becomes the ground it stands on. The throne means nothing when the floor beneath it belongs to you. And now they realize, the one who stayed quiet, the one who listened, the one who acted dumb, was the one who placed the very ladder they climbed. You made them. And now you've unmade them. You were never invisible. You were ignored. And that is the most lethal position in power, to be seen and dismissed. Because people only protect themselves from threats they recognize. But when they don't see the blade, they bleed before they understand. That's who you became. The hidden dagger beneath the smile. The echo that wasn't just listening, it was memorizing. The silence that didn't beg to be heard, it waited to be feared. They taught you weakness by trying to humiliate you. They trained your eyes by lying to your face. They gave you every tool to destroy them. And now, when they look around for allies, for favors, for forgiveness, they find nothing. Because they were too loud when they thought they were right. And now, Your silence has become the wall they can't climb. And the irony? They will say you changed. They will say you became cruel. They will cry that you had no mercy. But they forget you begged them once with your silence. You begged them with patience. You begged them by stepping aside. But they took your stillness as surrender. And now, you owe them nothing. Not even your voice. Let them collapse. Let them fall into the hole they swore you belonged in. Because this is not revenge. This is the law of nature. Underestimate no one who has mastered silence. Underestimate no one who knows how to play the fool so perfectly. Even truth stops questioning him. You are no longer part of their game. You are the storm that ended it. Not with noise, not with chaos, but with the slow, irreversible silence that surrounds power just before it strikes. You never screamed for power. You let it grow beneath your skin. Slowly, quietly, not to impress, but to transform. And now the world sees a different version of you, not the one they laughed at, not the one they ignored, but the one who watched them closely, memorized every weakness, and rose without needing applause. That's the final form of strategy, to arrive without warning, to become the silence they thought was safe. And when you speak now, it's not to be heard, it's to be remembered. Because you no longer play the fool. The role is complete, the lesson delivered, and those who once ruled the stage have forgotten their lines. The masks are off, the room is cold, and the one they never looked at is now the one they look up to, but it's too late. You're not here to be celebrated or to prove them wrong, you're here to disappear, leaving behind only one thing. Silence, a silence that echoes louder than any victory speech, that haunts the prideful, that rewrites history without needing to speak a word. That's what true dominance looks like, not noise, not revenge, but presence so powerful it breaks people from the inside. And yet you remain still, calm, distant, as if you were never part of their world at all. Because maybe you weren't. Maybe you were always meant to walk above it, not with pride, but with precision. Not with anger, but with understanding. You saw their need to be seen and chose invisibility. You saw their hunger to be admired and chose isolation. You saw their desperation to be followed and chose the throne they never saw. And now, as they try to catch up, to apologize, to connect, you've already vanished, not in body but in meaning. Because the moment they understood who you really were, you were already gone. That is the final move. The final deception, not just to rise, but to rise so far that your silence becomes legend, so far that your foolish smile becomes myth, so far that they never know whether it was all an act or whether they were always too blind to see the truth. You don't need to tell them. Let them wonder. Let them rot in that question. Because Machiavelli was right. The greatest power is not to conquer your enemies. It's to make them realize they never even knew you. They won't forget you. Not because you begged to be remembered, but because your silence carved itself into their conscience. You were the absence that echoed, the stillness that screamed, the smile that made them question everything they once knew about power. And now, they sit with their regrets, quiet, afraid, rewinding moments they dismissed you, searching for the clue they missed. But there is none, because you never left breadcrumbs. You left shadows, and no one chases shadows. They haunt alone. You never wanted revenge. You wanted distance. You never needed to defeat them. You just needed to show them what it feels like to lose someone they never valued. And that's the real burn, not that you rose, but that you rose without them. This is the throne they never saw, the one built in silence, guarded by patience, ruled by precision. They spoke of empires while you became one. Quietly. You didn't crown yourself. You didn't scream your victory. You vanished into legend not as a man who was loud, but as a man who was right. And now they fear not what you said, but what you never had to. They fear that you were always 10 steps ahead, that their laughter was fuel, that their doubt was design, that your weakness was never real, it was permission. You gave them the illusion of power, and then you walked away with the truth. Let them wonder forever who you really were. Let them write stories, twist memories, and whisper your name behind closed doors. That's your empire now, not built of stone, but of silence, fear, and memory. The kind that never dies. The kind that doesn't need monuments. Because you, my friend, became the myth. And Machiavelli would have smiled not because you followed his path, but because you vanished before they realized it was your footsteps they'd been chasing all along. The world never belonged to the loud. It belonged to the ones who could see through the noise. The ones who didn't need to compete because they had already outgrown the game. They told you that power was about shouting, about standing tall, about taking space. But what they never realized is that the most dangerous presence is the one that doesn't speak, doesn't move, doesn't seek. It just exists like gravity, invisible, unstoppable. And that's who you've become. You weren't always this way. You were once the one who tried to be understood, who tried to explain, who tried to earn respect through words and effort. But the world didn't listen. They laughed, they doubted, they called you slow, weak, naive. And that's when you stopped talking, not because you were broken, but because you were done explaining yourself to the blind. That was the day your transformation began. You started paying attention, not to what people said, but to what they avoided saying, not to their compliments, but to their patterns. You watched how they changed faces depending on who was watching. You watched how they admired strength, only to destroy it once it no longer served them. You watched the ones who preached loyalty betray without hesitation. And slowly, you stopped believing in the masks. You saw through all of it. And that's when you realized power doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from being untouchable. And to be untouchable, you must become unpredictable. You must become unknowable. You must become everything they never prepared for. That's why you started acting the fool. Not because you were one, but because you knew they only fear what they understand. If they don't see the weapon, they don't block. If they don't feel the heat, they don't prepare for the fire. You made yourself forgettable so they'd stop guarding their weaknesses. You played small so they'd open their doors. You gave them just enough truth to lower their shields, and then you waited, quietly, patiently, like a shadow that knows the sun won't last forever. And now, the sun has fallen, and they're finally realizing you were never really gone. You were behind them the entire time. They will never say it out loud. Their pride won't allow it, but they feel it. The shift, the fear, the regret. They'll try to act like you didn't matter, like your silence didn't haunt them, like your distance didn't echo. But they know. Every room you left became colder. Every conversation you didn't respond to became heavier, because your presence or your absence was never neutral. It was always a message. And now the message is written into their bones. That's what happens when the fool turns out to be the architect. That's what happens when the weakest one becomes the one holding the strings. And still, you don't scream. You don't point fingers. You don't return to the stage because you don't need to. You've already won, not in their eyes but in your own. You've mastered the one thing they could never understand. Power without noise. Control without confrontation, revenge without violence. And that scares them more than any speech you could give. Because now they don't know where you are. They don't know how much you know. They don't know when you'll move, or if you already have. That uncertainty is your crown, and it fits you perfectly. You must never go back. Not to prove anything. Not to remind them. Not to relive the pain. The game is over. You're not the same piece anymore. You are the board. And no one plays without your permission. Let them play among themselves. Let them chase their illusions. Let them believe the masks they wear are their true faces. While you watch, from a place so far above, they can't even see you anymore. That's what happens when the fool stops performing and starts building. You didn't escape the pain. You evolved through it. You didn't ignore the betrayal. You studied it. You didn't run from the darkness. You made it kneel. And now the silence you carry isn't emptiness. It's loaded. With memory. With calculation. With force. Every step you take is heavy because it's been planned 100 times in your mind. Every glance you give is precise because it's been trained through pain. Every word you choose is fatal because silence taught you that the wrong sentence can expose everything. That's why you speak less now. That's why you move differently. That's why you smile without smiling. Because nothing is casual anymore. Not your presence. Not your time. Not your forgiveness. Let them come to you with flowers. Let them call it misunderstanding. Let them offer friendship. Let them try to soften the edges of what they broke. But you know the truth, they weren't mistaken. They were comfortable. They believed you had nowhere else to go. They thought you'd stay waiting, desperate, hungry for crumbs. But you weren't waiting. You were transforming. In silence, in secret, in solitude. And now that you've returned, you're no longer one of them. You are what they fear, becoming the one who doesn't need anyone to rise. The one who never begged. The one who was always alone and made that loneliness into a weapon. So, what now? You vanish. You become myth. Let the world wonder how you did it. Let them try to reverse engineer your patience. Let them fail to recreate the fire you forged from being forgotten. That's your legacy now. Not revenge, not domination, but mystery. The kind of mystery that haunts every room you never enter again. The kind that makes people nervous when your name is mentioned. Not because you were cruel, but because you were real. And they couldn't handle real.